Yeah, okay, I'm gonna get everything set up right now. Steve, I'm gonna go live, so hold on a minute while I get
I
that all
see
going.
clear on my screen. Is that what it's supposed to be?
I don't have my video on.
Okay, but I see your name. So does that?
Okay, Steve, we are live. We should be on our YouTube live right now. And I want to welcome everybody for coming to Lessons from the Trenches. And Steve and I are with you again today. And we're going to talk a little bit about DIY research and some pros and cons, and maybe some tips that you can use to do that effectively if you are of the mind to do that. Steve, give us a little thumbnail of what you do.
Yeah, I've got a history, or should I say experience, with in corporate and consulting research, consumer research and brand strategy, building strong brands based on insight into consumers or customers. And I do qualitative and quantitative research and also some brand strategy work.
All right. And I am Becky Amble, and I work with businesses that are in the B2B space that are looking to increase their revenue and profits, and put together with them step-by-step plan on how to accomplish all of that. Usually our first step is finding out more about the customer. So we do a lot of research, and that's where Steve and I overlap a bit. So today we're going to talk about DIY and how that works or doesn't work, and some issues to know about. Now, some of these ideas seem to be kind of similar. We're going to talk about 5 issues or concerns, problems, whatever you want to call them, that is involved in this. And then we're going to wrap up. So thank you for joining us. Steve, you've got the first 3.
Okay, yeah, sure. And I think it's important to first say that we're not talking about necessarily that people can't do it, but there are things to watch out for. And as I look at the list, it's basic research. What's the word I'm looking for? Basic elements of doing good research. And the first one is just the overall design of the research. And some of the other ones we're going to talk about are part of this or overlap, but like Becky said, but you've got to really have research design that is carefully considered. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is thinking about what are the objectives of the research? Who are you researching? What is your target audience? What methods would be most appropriate given the objectives? And without really understanding or articulating these factors, you may not be able to design a research study that will be effective. In other words, that will yield valid and reliable results. Another question that's part of this one that I think you should ask is, what am I going to do with the results when I get them? Which I think is a critical part of, maybe that's a good way to express the objectives even. Another issue, which we'll go to number 2, is inappropriate data collection methods. If you select inappropriate methods to collect the data, if it's based on biases or incomplete data set, then your choice of the collection method will not address the objectives, will not represent the target audience, and may in fact result in collecting data that's ineffective or not useful given your objectives. A third is the sample selection. Sampling is critical because what you really need to do is select a sample that represents the universe that you want to address. In other words, if I project from what would be relatively few people, even if it's a few hundred, to the larger audience for your product or service, what population are you targeting, then the results will be ineffective. So you've got to make sure that while there's an error range around any sampling project, and certainly risk involved, which can be expressed in terms of confidence levels, et cetera, you've got to at least know that within a certain degree of accuracy that you're representing the population. So make sure that you're really understanding your sampling techniques, especially are they representing your target audience. You really want to make sure that the sample is representative of your target, and just so you don't end up with conclusions that are about somebody else than your marketing target.
All right. Did you cover all three?
Yeah, I believe I
Okay.
did.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, the big thing about sample is just that, it's a sample. So
Right.
it's got to represent something more than just that sample.
Yeah, I know 2 and 3 had some similarities there, so I wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
All right.
sure.
Well, I'm going to talk about number 4, which is inadequate data analysis. And I think a comparison might be data analytics that are so prevalent now when you're in the digital sphere of things, and people seem to be pretty familiar with data analytics. And of course, there's a degree program in it and everything. It's become very specialized. So we want to think about how we look at the data, how we analyze it, somewhat similar to some things that Steve has already said. And poor analysis of that data can lead to inaccurate conclusions, which again is going to take you down the road of ineffective marketing strategies, really some things that Steve talked about. So just as an example, in the old days, we used to do, not that you can't now, but crosstabs is a basic analytical tool. So let's say that you had 10 questions in your survey and you had 4 multiple choice answers for each of those questions. And then you want to do what we call a cross tabulation, and you want to see how people answered number 1 based on some demographic factor. So if you're doing consumers, you'd cross tab that with age, gender, education, income, possibly. If you're doing B2B, you might do some cross tabulation with the industry, the size of the company, the revenue of the company, something that you're going to cross tab. Well, back in the day, when we had big printout paper, I swear, one of the studies that I first did years ago, I think we had a 5-inch stack of printout paper. It might have been 10. It was massive. So you get this huge, potentially, amount of information, and all of a sudden you're just trying to figure out, well, what is relevant? What makes sense? What do we care about? You know, what is going to have impact? And that's where I bring up data analytics in the digital world now, because with data analytics, you can get data on almost anything that you want. And where people get hung up a lot of times is, what is relevant? What do I look at that's going to help me make a better business decision? So keep in mind that you want to have good analysis and you want to be real clear on what it is that you're trying to analyze. And the 5th point is misinterpretation of results. So again, you might have data and answers to your questions, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, and the quantitative is more like the forced choice, multiple choice, and the qualitative is more of a discussion. Anyway, we can draw inaccurate conclusions. Anybody can do that, and you're less likely to have that happen when you are dealing with somebody that is trained and does research a lot, because they know what to look out for. And I just wanted to mention, because I used to do a lot of work as a futurist, and so I was always reading other studies and doing my own. And in a national publication that is very credible and well known, I would find occasions that they misinterpreted the data. And so, I mean, it can happen to anybody. I just want you to keep that in mind. A couple things that Steve brought up that made me think of a couple things is, he said, you need to know what you're going to do with the results. Make sure before you do any research that you are going to use the information. When I used to work a lot with my PhD buddy, Henry, we would talk about, if people answer question 2 in a certain way, can we do something with it? If you're going to get answers that you can't deal with in your business, then you better not ask the question, because that creates dissatisfaction. The other thing I want to mention, and this happens in particular in customer satisfaction research, that if you go do a study and you don't do anything with the data, as in making improvements in your service, in your business, products, or whatever it is, that creates a higher level of dissatisfaction with those people you surveyed than you had before you did the study. So that's where, as Steve said too, make sure you know what you're trying to accomplish. Only ask questions that make sense, that you can do something about, and then take action. The other thing that's really helpful is to give participants some feedback. And I do strictly B2B. So in our world, a lot of times people feel like they're more included if you say, hey, we'll give you the highlights. And again, in this kind of thing, it's kind of a little bit off topic. When you are sharing results of your study, whether you have somebody professionally do it or you do it yourself, it's still an issue. You don't need to share everything that you learn. You share what you decide is appropriate to share with those people that participated. So keep that in mind. It's not like you just hand over all your information. Steve, we were going to talk a little bit more about bias and how that can be a factor, because the employees doing our research, if we're in company A, you know, Steve and I operate as a third party, so we bring in more objectivity and we can tell participants, hey, say anything you want, it just goes to us. Nobody is going to know exactly what you said, et cetera, et cetera. Our job is to find out good things, negative things, anything that's on your mind, just tell us what it is. So when you do it yourself, there is an inherent bias that you can't get away from, that people will try to give you nicer, more positive comments if they know somebody from your company is doing the research, and the person doing the research in the company is going to be more likely to say things like, oh, good, oh, great. And in our training, we tell people, you cannot say good, you cannot say great, you can say okay, and you can say next, and you can say next question, things like that. So it's just so many little subtleties. Steve, I don't know if you want to touch a little bit more on bias, or if you want to talk about some of the work you did, like an observation as a methodology that people often forget. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Steve. Steve, unmute. Steve, I don't know if you can hear me. There you go.
I got you. I'm ready. Okay. I think bias is an issue when, you know, research is done internally or by employees. And I understand there's reasons to do it that way. It's can be inexpensive, maybe at zero cost if the employee is on salary and they're just doing this project for you. But I think, so our purpose here is not really to say you can't do it, or maybe that you shouldn't do it, but there's a lot of considerations you need to have before you do it. You know, before you decide that I can do this myself, or we can do it internally. And so it's not that, you know, this is rocket science. I mean, you can make it rocket science, but it doesn't have to be. But it's really a point is that to consider the critical elements of the research that we've talked about in terms of you know, clear objectives, sample selection, data analysis, data reporting, et cetera. And that's where the bias really seems to creep in. If you're an employee of the company, you probably are hesitant to report bad results, especially if it's let's say a new product that a company has put a lot of effort and money already into, okay, or people's jobs depend on it. So not that as an objective person, like Becky said, we want to cost anybody their jobs, but, you know, it would be our role to be objective, and then the company can do with that what they want to do. So that's a big concern. You know, overriding is just make sure that if you want to do something like this yourself, you can certainly engage somebody like me, somebody like Becky. We're really good, so to speak, but we're not that expensive, and it might be worth your while. And just to make sure you're including all the elements we've talked about and being aware of some of the things that we've talked about as well.
You know, one of the things that we didn't mention that I know you and I talk about is in recruiting people that you're going to interview, that Steve and I, generally, we hire recruiters to find people for us to interview. There are companies all over the US that have massive databases just of people to interview. So that's something to keep in mind. One thing I wanted to mention is I think observation is an often underused resource or methodology. And one of my clients, Kinko's, which is now FedEx, used that and hired me, and I would go to different offices or different stores. And I remember the one in particular, they wanted to know what doors were people using, were they confused, did they have supplies, did they seem to be happy? And I was really, it was really kind of fun because so often people don't use observation. Now I know we're out of time, so we're going to wrap up here. Please let us know what you'd like for us to talk about. And I'm pretty sure our next meeting is going to be on Wednesday. Whoops, I was going to share the screen. Just a minute. Now when we're getting there. Okay, there's our contact information. And I believe our next meeting, we'll send out something on LinkedIn, will be Wednesday, August 16th. Also, if you want to look at any of the replays of what we've done 4 programs so far. You can go to my YouTube channel. That's where I've been putting them all, and let us, or take a look at things. So if you tuned in today, let us know. Would you like for us to talk about voice of the customer? Would you like for us to talk about customer sat? Would you like for us to talk a little bit more about how to DIY it? Or what's on your thoughts as far as how we could be helpful? And thank you for joining us, Steve. I think it's a wrap.
Yes, I think that's good. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll see you next time.